What if the future of our cities isn't just about creating living ecosystems where architecture breathes alongside nature?
We need to invent a city which is much more alive cities for all beings, not only human beings, but for the trees and the birds and the butterflies.
Today, we're diving into the mind of Adam Kurdahl, founding partner of SPOL Architects, splitting his time between Oslo, one of the smallest capitals, and São Paulo.
You see these photos of excavation 8 floors below the buildings floating on concrete pillars.
From floating heritage buildings over 8-story excavations.
It's all about the space between the buildings, basically, and how do we use this space to improve our collective environment.
But in the spaces between buildings. With 25 years of international practice, Adam has led award-winning projects from Oslo's Nethergate Cultural District to Brazil's largest heritage renovation, the House, recipient of Norway's prestigious Howens Award.
A project called Cidade Matarazzo in São Paulo. It's, I think, one of the biggest renovation projects.
Ready to discover how one architect is trying to transform São Paulo by 2035. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Inevitable Cast. This podcast is sponsored by Inevitable Flow. We help architecture, engineering, and construction companies generate a consistent flow of qualified project leads using smart AI solutions. If you want to book a free consultation to find out more, click on the link in the description of the show. Our guest today is Adam Kurdahl. He's the founding partner of SPOL Architects, an international practice with offices in São Paulo and Oslo. With more than 25 years of experience, Adam has led award-winning projects that bridge architecture and urbanism, from the Nethergate Cultural District in Oslo to innovative master plans and iconic buildings like the V House, which was a recipient of Norway's prestigious Howens Award. Educated in Copenhagen, Delft, and Aarhus, Adam brings a global perspective rooted in both European and Latin American contexts. At SPOL, he and his partners champion architecture that adds social and economic value, seeing every project as a part of its wider cultural and ecological landscape. Adam, it is a pleasure to have you here today. Your career spans from the Netherlands, and then you moved to São Paulo and you co-found SPOL that works between São Paulo and Oslo. Can you share the story of how those experiences shaped your vision for architecture? What has inspired you to start SPOL Architects?
Well, first of all, thank you, Guy. It's a pleasure to be here. That's a big question, but I mean, I'm super inspired by these differences between Oslo and São Paulo. Oslo is like one of the smallest capitals in the world, and São Paulo is one of the biggest cities in the world, and see these struggles that you deal with. Many of them are similar struggles about public space and connectivity of the cities. A lot of the struggles are combined, but I think very much our work, or my work, is very much about being international and local at the same time, to understand challenges in each location is super simple. So it's not a kind of one size fits all. It's more like a one size fits none. So that kind of has to be adapted in each location. So every project is different, every location is different, and every culture is different. I mean, it's funny because being in Brazil, I'm born in Denmark and have a company in Norway, and the Brazilians always say, wow, but you must be so used to the cold because you're from Norway, from Denmark. And it's funny because the Norwegians, they go to the beach as well. The most beautiful beaches in the world, they're actually in the north of Norway. And there are not a lot of people there, but in the summer there are actually people going to the beach in north of Norway, and it's the most pristine sand with the most beautiful landscape. It's just absolutely stunning. And then in Brazil, you think it's always warm, right? But it's actually super cold in Brazil in the summer because the houses doesn't have heating. It's all about how you perceive reality, because I never felt cold in Scandinavia because the houses are warm. In Brazil, you feel a lot of cold because the houses are not heated. It's ecologically thinking, it's much better because a Brazilian building spends much less energy than a Scandinavian building, even though in Scandinavia you try to do passive houses and you try a lot of things to not waste energy, but still a European, especially Scandinavian building, just spends much more energy than a Brazilian building does, because Brazil in many ways builds similar technology today that you did 50 years ago. Is very much about concrete and blocks. Of course, I mean, if you do a AAA office building, it has more technology, but a large part of the construction in Brazil deals with very simple methods for ventilation, which is natural ventilation, and you don't have issues with cold bridges, you don't have issues with insulating your windows, and you have a single glazing, and your windows actually never close completely. So you just have a natural flow of air, and it's in many ways just so much better.
Amazing. I can't help but ask you, how did you end up in Brazil?
It's a long story short, but basically after 12 years in Norway, I really wanted to move somewhere else. I really wanted to move to a big city, and I wanted to move to a place where I could really use my skills and my education to be part of creating the new crowd, of creating the future. And I went to Tokyo, São Paulo, and New York, and I said, where do I want to live? And São Paulo was the obvious choice because it was just before the World Cup, so it was the cover of The Economist with the statue with Jesus from Rio de Janeiro. Brazil takes off, and the Brazilian economy was really fantastic, and the climate in Brazil was wonderful, and it's huge democracy that has the greatest history of modern architecture of any country in the world. I mean, where the Europeans, they spent a lot of time thinking about modernism, and the Brazilians, they didn't have time to think, they just built it. I mean, they built Brasilia. And so there has this great history of architecture, and it has this growing population and a huge demand for architecture and engineering, because Brazil needs to build everything: houses, schools, airports, ports, infrastructure. I mean, it needs everything, which is the opposite of Europe, because I feel like Europe is, you're living off the work of our grandfathers that built Europe, that built the United States. It's so much in the past, and Europe should not make any new buildings because the population in Europe is declining and it's built so much. So Europe just needs to renovate their buildings, and it's the only sustainable solution is to renovate the existing building structure. And Brazil needs to build. Since I came 12 years ago, the population in Brazil grew 25 million, which is 5 times the size of Denmark, where I was born. So in the 12 years I've been here, the country grew 5 times the size of the country where I'm born. And it just shows me there's so much to do, and you can be part of creating the future in Brazil rather than living off the work of others.
Yes, amazing. I'm sure that like this contrast that you just pictured for us really well has influenced your design philosophy in many ways. Could you expand a little bit more on like how this contrast has influenced your design philosophy?
It's very much about I think you need to understand the psychology of the people where you work. I mean, as I say, the Norwegians go to the beach as well, the Brazilian goes to the beach as well, but if you go to a Norwegian beach, people will stay the maximum distance they can from one and each other. You make your kind of own personal space. And the Brazilians just sitting right next to each other on the beach because it's all about being together. So this perception of how you interact and how you use public spaces is super important to understand how you design a city. But I think our work in Brazil is very much about making a more democratic city and a more accessible city, to break down the barriers, to make a safer city. I mean, São Paulo has huge problems of commuting. I mean, people commute 2 or 3 hours to work because they live here and they work here. So a lot of our work is dealing, how can you make a more sustainable city, a more democratic city where people can actually live and work in the same locations, and where you can use private commission to improve the public space that is inflicted upon by your building.
Right. What is your current role at SPOL Architects? What do you do within the partnership of the company today?
I always say that the idea of the master architect, which is very prevalent in Brazil, of Oscar Niemeyer, that made a sketch of a thing. And I mean, basically Niemeyer said that Niemeyer told the world that architecture is something you do in one night, right? You do a great sketch and then architecture is done. And the Brazilian architects are suffering a lot from that, because there's this general perception that architecture is really done in one night. So any client you meet in Brazil will expect you to start and finish your concept design within a night or maximum 1 week. So what I do is very much to get away from this idea of this master architect that makes this great sketch and then the office just somehow executes it. So it's much more, I see me much more like an editor of the best ideas. We have take the best ideas and edit those ideas to really make the idea grow. So it's much more to collect the ideas and make possible the creation of ideas than anything. So it's a daily exercise of communicating with people, meeting with people, discussing designs, clients, people that works at the office, engineers, everybody. So it's just about bringing those best ideas together and make it possible for people to come up with those ideas. And that involves anything from making designs, from meeting with clients, revising drawings. But I mean, we have a very competent team that has specific tasks. I'm a little bit everywhere.
Yes, I see that. And when it comes to having a team in Oslo and a team in São Paulo, how do you manage this so projects can move seamlessly between offices, or are they more locally focused?
They are more locally focused, but I think the pandemic taught us, I mean, before the pandemic, I was traveling to Europe several times a year, almost every month. And now I don't go so often now because, I mean, the pandemic taught us that we have Zoom and Meet and Teams that allows us to work online. And you don't need to take a flight of 12,000 kilometers because you need to have one meeting about something, which is something I try to avoid to do. So it's really this ability for the entire world to connect through the platforms. It sounds really banal, but it changed a lot the way we work. And we have people in various locations working at the office. I mean, I'm sure everybody does that. It creates a much more seamless integration and much easier to share resources and ideas based on this ability to work online, obviously.
So are you structured as like a regular architecture firm where you have the designers, but you also have like some project managers that make sure that the project is moving forward as expected?
Yeah, basically. I mean, we have for each department, we have for the concepts, for the definitive design, for the executivo, for the interiors, for the urbanism. We have one person location responsible for each department, and then different project leaders depending on the size of the projects.
Okay. Would you mind going a little deeper on what does your process look like from an early strategy to an execution? And how do you integrate the clients into this journey? Kind of grasping what they want and making sure that it can be done and then creating it. What's the process like?
Well, the first phase is really important in that sense. What we do, I think it's a little bit different, at least in the Brazilian context, but maybe not other places in the world. We make workshops with our clients. So we develop design ideas or strategies or numeric ideas, depending on the scale of the project, completely different strategies. And then we present those to the clients through models, physical models, diagrams, sketches. So we never bring to the client one final solution, say, this is it, take it. I mean, it's a very traditional architect to bring to the client one solution. It's much more about making several alternatives and discussing that with the clients. It's a series of workshops that brings you closer and closer to one chosen solution. But during this process, in the first meeting, we typically have 5 alternatives. And we discuss with the client, we narrow that down to 3 alternatives. We then narrow down, and in the end, hopefully you arrive at one final solution which everybody agrees is the most viable in terms of concept and economy and constructability and all those things. And everybody bites into that idea because they all been part of creating the idea along this process. And this is super important. After this process, it becomes a much more traditional process of design development and integrating the engineers and integrating all the different demands. But this first phase of the workshops with the client is really important, the way we work.
Yeah. And if there is oversight on that specific process, early stage process, it causes way more headaches in the future for you and for the clients. So specifying exactly what will go into design development is definitely a huge part of this process. I know this from experience because as acting as a project manager on an architecture and engineering company, often we would get to the to the design development phase, and we would look at it, and the engineer would be scratching their head. It's like, well, this is like, we can't really do this, you know. And then you like have to tell the client, and the client said, well, but wait, back in the first days you told me we could do this. And then you're like, oh, you know, it happened more often than I would like it to.
No, it's a classic error, right, of the lack of integration of the engineering intelligence in the process that you work. I mean, you work too long and then the engineers comes afterwards. So this is also part of this process. Is not only about integrating the client demand, but it's just as much about integrating all the other specialities in the project.
Everyone has a seat on the table early on.
Yeah.
What are the projects there current, or the projects types, if you want to keep them private, but like what's keeping you busiest right now in São Paulo and Oslo?
Well, actually, it's a lot of different types of lots of different types of projects. No, we do everything from small interiors to urban plans. So we have a lot of different scales of product, but it's also nice to have these different scales of product, because you can always, I mean, you always have something on construction, and you always have something that much longer and more strategic. The urban plans typically takes several years. We have urban plans we worked on for 8 years. And it goes on for a long time. But a lot of our work is currently in São Paulo, and construction of residential and office buildings. But we also do urban plans, we do interiors. So it's lots of different scales of projects.
How do you decide like which project is worth your time, like worth pursuing for your practice versus others? Because I asked this because in previous experience, sometimes we take some projects and we look at it, you know, in the rear mirror afterwards. It's like, this didn't really fit what we should do best, you know, like, so how do you like filter those?
I think that changed a little bit with the time, because I started in Brazil 12 years ago, and I came to Brazil. I didn't know anybody, didn't know anything. So it's very much about going out looking for work. I mean, looking for clients, looking for contacts. And now after 12 years, we have a lot of recurring clients. So it's much easier for us now to choose the product that we want. And the clients that come back to us is obviously clients that we like to work with, and they like to work with us, and we understand the philosophy behind the work that is done and the way of thinking. But I mean, it's super important to understand what is the intention of the client with each projects, because they are obviously projects that you rather not do. So it's very much about understanding the ambition of the client. I mean, it needs to be aligned. Our project usually always deals with more than just the numeric demands. I mean, how do you make a better public space? How do you make a better piece of architecture? How do you design spaces for people to meet, to understand what are the interests of the clients? So to avoid doing construction, just do construction works, but actually do architecture.
You mentioned a lot of clients come as like referrals or like a returning clients, right? Like, is this most of like the channel that brings you the most client nowadays, or do you have other channels that also brings you clients, different channels?
For sure, both. But I mean, we don't do a lot of acquisition work, actually. I mean, because I think the company grows and we get much and more people contacting us based on work that we've done and what they see that contacts us directly. So it's limited what we do as acquisition work. We don't have a big acquisition office. It grows organically by itself.
And in my previous work, I also was often caught trying to navigate between like ambitions, being like the client or our company's ambitions, what regulations allowed to do, and like the process that regulations required this project to go through, and of course economics, you know, making sure this is like viable. So in navigating these parameters, what frictions do you see most often in getting projects built? Is it like client expectation? Is it regulations, or maybe like financials? Like what are the most frictions you see?
I mean, I think it's definitely all of those things, but I think the biggest friction is, I mean, to make a good piece of architecture, you need a good architect, you need a good client. And it's really, I mean, it's not to sound condescending, but it's really important that the client understands what the client is doing and what the demands are and the impact of what they're asking for. I mean, there's nothing worth about having a super dreamy client that wants to do all the right stuff, all the sustainable stuff, and when he understands how much does it cost to build this, then suddenly it's not so interesting anymore. So it's very much about understanding the demands of the clients. And of course, I mean, last year's the regulations of São Paulo has changed a lot. So there's a lot of changes to the law. So you have to we have projects that in the middle that during construction, because of an adaptation to the law, you have to redesign the project and things like that. So that's definitely a challenge. We have a lot of our work is about making sure that everything is within these urban regulations. Not so much the architectural regulations, but much more the urban regulations. I mean, the architectural regulations are fairly simple, the size of doors and stairs and distances, but the urban regulations about permeable areas and all those things are much more complex.
Right. I'm curious, like when you decided to set a new office in São Paulo, if you were aware of the regulatory environment in São Paulo at all, or this like came as you started getting into it?
No, I think it was, I mean, not that I was super young, but there was a certain amount of naivete thinking, well, I have an office in Norway, it went well, and it was hard, but it worked, so let's move to Brazil and do the same thing. And it was definitely, I mean, it's much more complex, but at the same time, I mean, this complexity of the Brazilian bureaucracy also makes that the Brazilians are much more creative. I mean, if in Norway something is not possible, it's not possible. If in Brazil something is not possible, let's find out how to make it possible. I mean, you're not breaking the law in any ways, but to understand, so the Brazilians are super creative of understanding this thing. But for sure, coming from Scandinavia to Brazil is a big challenge of adapting and understanding all the rules. But in the end, a lot of the Brazilian rules are also very mathematic. I mean, the building regulations in the Brazilian cities are super mathematic as well. So you can very much break them down into an Excel sheet. Not the quality of the architecture, but all the demands, all the law is very much about maximum area and minimum area permeable and how to get the sunlight into the neighboring buildings. There are a lot of these rules that you mathematically can analyze and understand. That makes it somehow easier.
Amazing. Still on this topic, I wonder if you because you have such a unique experience with Scandinavian regulations and now in Brazilian São Paulo regulations, what are the biggest differences in the market dynamics or like that you see when you compare the two of them?
It's basically totally different. It's very much about time, and it's very much about how do you invest. I mean, the interest rates in Europe or in Norway are quite low, and the interest rates in Brazil traditionally are quite high. So in Brazil you have much less time because capital is much more expensive. And this influences everything you do as an architect or in construction, because time is super costly. The moment you put up your first investment, you have to run because your interest rates are very high, so you cannot not wait. And I think this almost negative interest rates that we had in Europe for the last many years, it changed now, makes that you have much more time to think, and time is not an issue in the same way. So once a Brazilian decides to do something, it generally goes much faster than when a Scandinavian decides to do something, because the Brazilian doesn't have time to waste, and Scandinavian can afford to wait and pause and think. And so this influences a lot how you work, a lot of the process.
Yeah, no, that is a very interesting insight, tying the speed of execution with the financial aspect of like how, that's a very interesting insight. I wonder, like, on your standpoint, like how do you manage the increasing pressure, perhaps most on the Brazilian side now, for speed in design and construction, while at the same time maintaining the quality of the work?
It's just about being transparent with your client when they ask you to do something in 3 weeks and you say, no, I'm sorry, it takes 3 months. And no, you have to be realistic. We use obviously a lot of digital help to improve our production and a lot of drawing programs and technical programs. But in the end, it's just about understanding the process and the time it takes to integrate all the intelligence of the team, and to be resistant and to accept that. But also to understand what is necessary at the moment, because you can go a long way with moving on with your planning of your construction work without having necessarily finished the architecture engineering. So I think what we see more and more is that people start construction maybe earlier. I mean, where previously you would, I think that happened a long time in Europe, but I don't think that happened so long ago in Brazil, that previously you finish your construction documents before you start breaking ground. And now, as happens a lot of other places in the world, you break ground much earlier. And this means that you need to have a more interactive process with the builders and the engineers and the investors.
All the disciplines. Would you like to highlight a project that SPOLs has worked on that represents your DNA, that you're proud to share? I know you won like a award on the V House. Maybe that one is one you want to highlight, but yeah, just tell us one that you're proud of and like lessons learned and things like this.
There are lots of different ones. The V House is a very dear project because it's one of the first projects that we did. Recently, we just finished two housing projects in São Paulo. One is called North and one is called Solo in the Jardins area in São Paulo, I'm very happy with them because we really try to kind of combine. The Brazilians are really good at concrete, right? I mean, the Brazilian modernism was just fantastic at concrete, and this technology continues. The engineers and the builders are really good at concrete, combined with a kind of Scandinavian simplicity. I mean, not about minimalism, but Scandinavian architecture is very much about natural material and light. So I think we combined in those two projects the kind of Scandinavian heritage with the Brazilian heritage of the modernism. So it's two. One is called Nord and one is called Solo. It's two residential projects. Quite happy with recently, or we're still working on actually, a big project called Cidade Matarazzo in São Paulo, which is a huge project with a French mastermind investor, Alex Allard, that bought an old hospital, a heritage listed hospital that was going to be demolished because nobody wanted to take care of it. He bought it, and he for 20 years was fighting to make the project happen. And in the end, we worked together with lots of architects in Jean Nouvel and Philip Stark, Triptyque, Ricciotti, Campana, Levinsky, lots of different architects, designers, engineers, and realizing this project. But it's quite a unique project because it's I think one of the biggest renovation projects probably anywhere in the world. Lots of heritage listed buildings, and we made a fantastic engineering feat because the buildings, it's an old hospital, and we excavated below all the buildings. We made theaters below, and we made conference halls below the existing buildings. So you see these photos of excavation 8 floors below the buildings floating on concrete pillars. There's a chapel floating with excavation 8 floors below. So in order to, in the middle of São Paulo, to make this project possible, because economically it would not be feasible to just renovate the buildings. So we had to make very complex engineering to be able to excavate below and make space for the technical spaces, lower the windows to make more daylight coming in, to be able to put functions inside. Now there's the 2 hotels, the Soho House, there's the Rosewood Hotel, there's the biggest private museum in Latin America, the Casa Bradesco is there, and this theater, a 500-seat theater below ground, below an existing heritage building, is almost done. So it's super exciting, and the whole project is always about the owner of the project always says it's not about architecture, it's about nature. So the project is also about planting 10,000 trees within the project boundaries and opening this whole area up to the city. And this is very rare because Sao Paulo has this forward-looking thing. So you buy the buildings, the existing buildings, you demolish them and you make a tower, and you buy the buildings, demolish them, and make a tower. But this was really about preserving the existing buildings and implementing this huge engineering below ground. It's a very exciting project. It's called Cidade Matarazzo.
That's amazing. I'm super excited. I mean, as a regular person, can I go visit it, or is it not ready yet?
No. I mean, the Soho House is open, the Rosewood Hotel is open, and so you can definitely go visit. There's a really beautiful garden, and then the rest of it is almost finished. And there's the Casa Bradesco, which is the big museum. The opening exhibition was the Anish Kapoor that happened like 6 months ago. There's a new, if you're in Sao Paulo, there's a exhibition opening on, I think on Thursday, no, on Monday, next Monday is the 3rd exhibition opens at the museum. So
I will definitely check that out. It sounds amazing. And now I know like one of the masterminds behind it. That's So cool. I'll have a totally different set of eyes on it right now. Amazing.
Yeah.
So on this, you mentioned that, people out now, they buy, they demolish, and then they build again. They're mostly interested in the land, not in whatever is on their land right now, right? And then they want to build something new. How do you see urbanism evolving in cities like São Paulo? And I'm gonna add versus Oslo, because you have this such a unique perspective on both worlds, and I just want to see how do they compare, and how do you see this evolving in São Paulo?
I see a huge need to, Sao Paulo signed up to the Paris Accord, which is basically that by 2050 we should be CO2 neutral. In order to do that, by 2035, Sao Paulo should cut in half the CO2 emissions, which is in 10 years. And to be able to do that, there needs to be a huge transformation of the city, and that's something we're working on to try to make a project, to make that happen. And it's very much, Sao Paulo has a huge problems of flooding, because you have this torrential rain, it rains. And because of the lack of permeable areas and the history of, Sao Paulo has lots of rivers, but most of those rivers are actually in canals. And the Rio Pinheiros, which is the big river, which has highway on both sides, it used to be a really meandering, beautiful river, and now it's a straight canal. There's been a lot of work recently to put bike lanes and plant trees for the native tree from the Mata Atlântica, the Atlantic rainforest, it was the biggest rainforest in the world. It was along the Atlantic coast of South America, which very little of that rainforest still stand. Everybody knows the Amazons, but actually the Atlantic rainforest was bigger. So it's a big work of returning this native forest to Brazil, to put back plants that actually adapt well to the Brazilian climate, and to really make a city which is much more, Jan Gehl, the Danish urbanist, was for the last many years been talking about people first, or cities for people, and I think it's about time that we talk about cities for all beings, not only human beings, but for the trees and the birds and the butterflies and the ants. We need to invent a city which is much more alive, to be able to combat these problems we have with the climate. And you see it a lot in Brazil, you see it everywhere, but whatever, it's forests burning or it's flooding. Last year the rivers in the Amazon was totally dry, and the south of Brazil was flooded. So it shows that the whole system is turned upside down. And as an architect, I think, how can we try to change that? The easiest way is to try to change our cities, because our biggest pollutants we have in the world are our cities. So how do you make a more sustainable city? Being a little bit careful of the word sustainable, because it's too overused, but really to make a city that has nature and deals with its water. It's a huge work that we're working on, how to improve that in Sao Paulo in general. And I think this is very different from Scandinavia, because in Scandinavia sustainability is much more about electric cars, or making your buildings consume less energy through more efficient insulation materials, more efficient heating systems. And in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, because the city is being so radically transformed, like every 5 years, Sao Paulo is being more or less rebuilt. This is such a radical transformation. So to use all this energy investment to also change the actual city, to change the actual fabric, to make nature part of the infrastructure of the city.
Very well said, Adam. I've read a book recently that was touching on the point of we live in a matrix of managed and unmanaged spaces, and biodiversity collapse, extinction, is intrinsically linked to the ability of the biodiversity to move freely from space to space. And when we create managed spaces, let's call them cities, right, that does not allow for biodiversity to migrate, to move, that creates pockets, which limits variations in DNAs, and ultimately leads to extinction. So the topic that you just mentioned is very, very important, not only for the inhabitants of São Paulo, but for biodiversity in general, to avoid this collapse that we are seeing. And I think, and maybe you agree with me that, the architects that are working on these managed spaces, they have a very important role in driving this ecological impact by being aware of this and applying sustainability principles into their designs to allow for more managed spaces that also incorporate the needs of the biodiversity, not only for humans.
Oh, Guy, perfectly. It's exactly that. I mean, that's exactly what we're thinking and what we're working on. And and it's a big problem in Sao Paulo, for example, because Sao Paulo is so huge. I mean, you don't have this problem really in Scandinavia, but anywhere in Europe. But Sao Paulo is so huge that the birds, I mean, there are types of birds that have problems migrating because the distance between the areas where they stop. I mean, the birds can migrate, but the insects cannot migrate. And when the insects cannot migrate, there are no insects, and then the birds also cannot survive, right? So the distance between these green oases in the city, if it's too big, it prohibits the life of biodiversity of the insects. When you don't have the insects, you don't have the birds. And when you don't have the birds, you don't have anybody that eats the fruits. And then you don't have anybody that germinates. And that, for example, there's a famous park in Sao Paulo on the Paulista, the main avenue, which is called Parque Trianon, which is 2 city blocks of Atlantic rainforest. But it's a dying piece of forest because the lack of migration of birds and biodiversity. I mean, the people that care for it, they have to keep it alive because, I mean, the biodiversity is too distant. So they're working on a project where they're trying to actually make a series of green spaces that connects this Parque Trianon to other green locations to allow for this biodiversity to happen. So it's very much about these transformations of the urban space and how we, inside our architectural project, obviously can plant nature, enrich our projects with nature, but also when you design urban spaces, how do you design those public urban spaces? I mean, how do you really make nature in them? How do you make pavings where the insects can walk between the stones? A very, very simple solution, but they're super important for the livability of our biodiversity and for the survival of the planet.
I can feel the eloquency that you speak about the subject, and I see that this is an issue that you are particularly compelled to address in your work. And I wonder, is there any other issues that you see that you try to address in your work as well?
I think together with this idea of the city for all beings, I mean, it obviously is also about the city for the human beings and make to transform a city where you don't depend on your car, but you can walk or you can take public transport, which sounds very banal, but I mean, it's one of the biggest shocks every time I go between Europe and Brazil is the difference in how we use the public space because of distance and security. I mean, how do you design a more secure city for human beings? And this comes back to bringing nature back into the city, but it's also about how you design your facades, how you avoid having walls in front of your buildings. So the most important work we do is really using our urban projects, architectural projects to transform the urban space, which I find much more exciting than the shape of the architecture. Obviously, we like to design buildings, but it's all about the space between the buildings, basically, and how do we use this space to improve our collective environment.
Amazing. With that being said, I want to ask you as we approach the end here, what are you focusing on for SPOL next? Are you thinking of new geographies or maybe like a deeper integration with technology? Like, what do you think is next in the next, let's say, 12 months for SPOL Architects?
I mean, my main project now is really this project about transformation of the city and how to make a plan for Sao Paulo 2035. I mean, we have 10 years. If we have 10 years to transform our city, what are the steps we need to do to make a radical transformation of the city? I mean, this is my main objective. Within the office, there are obviously lots of thinking around the use of AI and how do we use AI to make better buildings and more efficient and things. But in more global terms, I'm much more excited about how to try to change the city.
Yeah, amazing. Touching on this topic about tools and AI, digital tools, AI, I assume you use BIM 360 or a similar software. They are reshaping workflows, right? Like, how is SPOL adapting to, or maybe experimenting with these innovations now?
I think we're one of the early adapters. I mean, we're one of the first offices in São Paulo to really implement across everything in BIM. I mean, we only work in BIM from the first sketch till the final delivery, and how we integrate. My partner Raisa is very much working on how to make a more integrated process, a more intelligent process, and how to integrate the use of new technologies in our work. So we have a department that focuses solely on this, how we use the programs to make our work better. So it's a constant process. But obviously everything is, I think, more or less now BIM is for everybody.
It is for everyone. I've worked in BIM for many years, and I've seen the benefits of it, and I've seen some limitations too. But yeah, the benefits way compensate for the limitations. But yeah, Adam, as a closing statement, I like to ask this to my guests here: if you could have a magic wand and solve one obstacle that is holding you back today, what would that be?
We would plant more trees.
Amazing.
No, it's really, I mean, it's really about that, to get everybody onto the idea that we need. I mean, well, it's not a closing statement, but I'm from Scandinavia, right? In Scandinavia, everything is taken care for by the government or by the collective society. I mean, you don't need to do anything. You don't need to fight for anything. But I mean, Scandinavian is the weird part of the world, right? When I was born, I thought Scandinavia, everybody is like Scandinavia, but actually nobody is like Scandinavia. There are much more people like Brazil. So if we want to change the world and improve the world, we need to do it, but we can't rely on our collective government to do it, which I always believed when I was younger, because I grew up in Scandinavia. So, I mean, and it's a beautiful idea, and it's fantastic that everything is done by a strong society, a strong government that somehow solves everything, and you can trust in them. And it's not that you cannot trust in the Brazilian system, but it's just that if you really want to change something, you need to start at a much smaller scale, and really you need to do it. So the closing statement is that I want everybody to understand that and get everybody out and you need to plant 100 trees in your lifetime, basically, to offset your CO2. So if I can convince everybody to plant 100 trees, I think we'll be happy.
I've planted my share this year. I've planted 5,000 coffee trees in my farm.
Wow, fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you. I appreciate your time and your insights and sharing your amazing experience so far. Thank you so much. That brings us to the end of this episode. This podcast is sponsored by Inevitable Flow. We help architecture, engineering, and construction firms generate a consistent flow of qualified project leads using AI-powered outbound system, so they can grow revenue without hiring a sales team or rely on unpredictable referrals. If you want to book a free consultation to find out more, click on the link in the description of the show. I'll see you next time.